What happens when progress forgets the people who made it possible? In a quiet valley brushed with the golden breath of wheat, an old man stood alone on a dirt path, while bulldozers waited at the edge of everything he'd ever built. A contract was ready, a signature away from erasing 3 generations. But what the developers didn't know, what they could never calculate on a spreadsheet, was that this land didn't just grow crops. It trained soldiers, it fed flight, it carried a promise older than them all. And the moment they tried to erase that history, they learned some ground doesn't give way. Some men don't sell. And sometimes the cavalry doesn't come in the form you expect. But when it comes, it shakes the sky. Tucked between the rolling plains of Georgia and the rusted spine of an abandoned rail line lay 980 acres of rich, stubborn land owned by Reed Carson. He wasn't flashy. He didn't speak in sound bites or tweets. He wore denim because it lasted, boots because they remembered every step, and a battered Stetson not for fashion, but because his father's sweat still lined the brim. Reed was 74. He didn't farm for profit anymore. Not really. The money came from hay and soy rotation, sure. But the purpose? That came from something bigger. You see, for over 60 years, Carson Ranch served as a training zone for military helicopter pilots. Every Thursday and every second Sunday, you could hear the distant thump of rotors before you ever saw the birds. Apache, Black Hawk, Chinook, names Reed could recite with more ease than any senators. They called it Zone Echo 9, but Reed called it sacred routine. His father, Dale Carson, had shaken hands with the first base commander back in 1953. No contracts, just trust. Every generation since honored that handshake. Reed didn't just maintain the airstrip, he brought out coffee at 4 a.m. He left spare fuel in the barn just in case. His wife, Loretta, used to cook for the crews until cancer took her 4 winters back. The soldiers sent flowers, not out of formality, but because they felt like family. And Reed, he kept showing up, because duty doesn't end when the camera pans away. It stays with you, in the soil, in the silence between each mission. Then came the letters. The envelope was heavy, too heavy for just paper. Inside, a cover letter from Altadine Growth Partners, a high-powered investment firm out of Atlanta, flanked a glossy brochure titled The Aero Rise Innovation Park. Underneath, a purchase offer, 7 figures, all cash, quick close. For most, it would have been a miracle. For Reed Carson, it felt like a funeral invitation. Altadine's plan was clear. The nearby city of Hartsville had become a hub for tech expansion, proximity to universities, tax incentives, and underutilized land. Carson Ranch was one of the last properties standing between them and a 200-acre vertical campus to host drone manufacturing, logistics, AI, and yes, luxury executive housing. The firm hadn't done its homework. They didn't know that Carson Ranch was one of only 3 unofficial but vital low-altitude training zones used by military pilots east of the Mississippi. They didn't understand the handshake legacy. They didn't ask about Echo 9. They didn't care. Reed didn't call them back. So they sent Lucas Dane, a 36-year-old VP of acquisitions who looked more at home in a Tesla than a pickup. He arrived on a Monday, stepped out of a black SUV, and walked past a rusted wind vane as if it didn't matter. "Mr. Carson," he said, "all teeth, no warmth. You've got an opportunity to build a legacy here." Reed's eyes never left the fence line. "Son," he said, "I already did." But Lucas wasn't deterred. He pulled out charts, timelines, valuation printouts. He talked about revitalization, job creation, municipal partnerships. Reed listened, quietly, until he said, "This land doesn't belong to progress. It belongs to purpose." By week's end, Altadine filed a petition with the county board claiming Carson Ranch was underutilized land critical to public infrastructure growth. Translation: they wanted to invoke eminent domain. Suddenly, Reed's farm wasn't just a farm. It was a battlefield. At the next county planning session, the energy in the room crackled, not with debate, but with something colder: inevitability. Reed Carson stood at the podium in his best jacket, frayed at the cuffs, clean at the collar. He wasn't there to plead. He was there to explain. "This land isn't just mine," he told the board. "It belongs to every pilot who's ever touched down here, to every mechanic who learned how a rotor sings, to every soldier who practiced low-flying maneuvers so they could go home in one piece." A few people nodded. Most looked down. One commissioner even yawned. Across the aisle sat Altadine's legal team, suits crisp and laptops open. They spoke of regional economic multipliers, underleveraged tax corridors, and the holy grail of local politics: job creation. Reed's words weren't in their language. Soil and silence don't fit in spreadsheets. When the vote came, it wasn't even close. 4-1 in favor of declaring the land eligible for conditional eminent domain review, a technical way of saying, "You're not safe anymore." Outside the courthouse, a local journalist named Sarah Patel from the Hartsville Standard approached Reed. She wasn't there for clicks. She knew the Carson name. Her father trained out at Echo 9 back in the day. "They're really doing this?" she asked, stunned. Reed nodded, eyes locked on the courthouse steps. "They don't see the ghosts," he said. "Only the grass." That night, Sarah wrote a piece titled "The Land That Taught Them to Fly." It included photos, grainy snapshots of soldiers on Reed's porch, kids drawing helicopters on the barn wall, even one of Loretta stirring coffee in a metal kettle while a Black Hawk hovered in the background. The article didn't explode. Not yet. But someone shared it in a veterans Facebook group. Then it hit Reddit. Then TikTok. And somewhere in a quiet Pentagon office, a junior staffer printed it out and left it on the corner of a leather desk with one line highlighted: "Some land trains crops." This land train's courage. The sound came just after dawn. Low, deliberate, thunderous, like a heartbeat echoing from the sky. Reed knew that sound. You don't forget it. The thrum of UH-60 rotors rolling in at treetop height. But it wasn't training day. He stepped out onto the porch in silence, coffee forgotten on the table. And there, like a steel-winged formation of memory and defiance, they appeared. 4 helicopters. One after another, they descended onto his fields with surgical grace. Soldiers disembarked in formation. At the center, a woman in dress blues, nameplate flashing gold in the morning light. Colonel Naomi Park, senior liaison to the Army Aviation Command. She walked up to Reed like she was approaching a monument. "Mr. Carson," she said, saluting, "we read the article." He didn't salute back. He just nodded, his voice low. "You trained here too?" "Class of 97, you fed me after my first solo hover. Your wife made cornbread." Reed smiled for the first time in days. That morning, Colonel Park sat with him at the same kitchen table where Loretta once served beans and biscuits. She listened. She asked. She took notes. She didn't interrupt. When she stood to leave, she said just one more thing. "We're going to fix this. By noon, the Pentagon press office released a brief but thunderous statement. Echo 9 is a protected legacy training site critical to national security. And just like that, the developers had a new problem. The federal government. Altadyne's attorneys scrambled. They filed appeals, claimed the designation was politically motivated, but it was too late. A preservation order was filed. Reed's land, his purpose, was now marked mission critical. Veterans across the country rallied. Former pilots posted their Echo 9 call signs on social media. Hashtags trended. Lawmakers backed off because there are some hills people will die on. And Reed Carson's farm had become one. The storm passed, but Reed didn't gloat. He didn't go on television. He didn't post a victory speech. What he did was walk the field, just like his father had, and his grandfather before that, and let the earth tell him it was still his. But the world noticed. In the months following the Echo 9 designation, something remarkable happened. Carson Ranch became more than protected ground. It became a living classroom. Colonel Naomi Park, true to her word, returned. But this time, not alone. She brought a group of cadets, young, wide-eyed, fresh from Fort Rucker. Reed greeted them like sons and daughters. He showed them how the wind worked in the valley, how early morning fog could disorient a green pilot, how to gauge the feel of the field beneath their boots before choosing a landing zone. Things no textbook could teach. Soon, military academies began requesting training sessions at Echo 9. Reed was asked to advise on a manual, legacy tactics for terrain-based flight. But he didn't stop at soldiers. Sarah Patel from the Hartsville Standard launched a grant fund in Reed's name, aiming to preserve other historical training grounds across the country. Retired pilots donated. Schools built curriculum around the site. One day, a young boy named Daniel, maybe 11, maybe 12, showed up with his mom. He had a shoebox full of drawings, helicopters, maps, mission reports scribbled in crayon. "I want to be like them," he said, pointing to the sky. Reed knelt beside him. "You already are. You showed up." The boy handed him a folded piece of paper. It was a letter. Inside, 5 words in messy block letters. "Thank you for the air." Reed kept it in his wallet, right next to the folded photo of Loretta. Altadyne didn't go quietly. In sleek conference rooms, miles away, they still saw Reed's property as a delay, not a denial. They pushed through PR campaigns, hired influencers, even offered scholarships tied to technology in rural development. But no matter how many suits they sent or headlines they tried to spin, one thing had shifted permanently. The story wasn't theirs anymore. Carson Ranch had become a symbol, not of resistance alone, but of redefinition. The Air Force issued an official commendation to Reed for exceptional civilian contribution to tactical readiness. Local officials reversed course. The same commissioner who yawned during Reed's speech now stood beside him at the unveiling of the new Echo 9 Memorial Pavilion, nodding solemnly as a bugler played taps. Schools from across the region bussed students in to walk the trails where soldiers once trained. Volunteers mapped out every crash site, every old trail marker, every story. Veterans began arriving too, one by one, often quietly. They didn't need cameras. They just needed closure. One man, Sergeant Calvin Reyes, who hadn't flown since 2004, stood in the old West Field and simply said, "This is where I learned I might live through it." It was never about acres. It was about what the land had absorbed: boots, oil, sweat, fear, hope. Meanwhile, Reed's health began to decline. Age had always been his quiet companion, but now it walked closer. Still, every morning he'd sit on the porch and wait for the wind shift, for the sound of engines, for the echo of purpose. On one of those mornings, Colonel Park returned, this time in civilian clothes. She brought with her a large framed aerial photo, Echo 9 at sunrise, golden light streaking across the fields. In bold print at the bottom, not all legacies are bought. Some are built. She handed it to Reed, her voice soft. You didn't just protect this land. You taught us why it matters. He nodded, too tired to say much, but in his silence, everything was understood. Autumn rolled in soft that year. The fields of Echo 9 rustled with golden hush. The barn stood painted and proud. The porch creaked with memory. And Reed Carson sat quietly in his favorite chair, blanket across his lap, radio tuned low to a station that mostly played silence between classical jazz and military band marches. He didn't talk much anymore, but his eyes were always fixed on the horizon, where the hills met the sky like folded arms holding everything together. He passed in his sleep on a Sunday. No fanfare, just a sunrise and a sigh. Word traveled fast, and when the town tried to plan a small memorial at the local church, the phone wouldn't stop ringing. By week's end, more than 300 people had RSVP'd. Soldiers, students, journalists, pilots, mechanics, kids who once played tag in the cornrows. The service was moved to the field. Colonel Park gave the eulogy. She didn't read from a script. She simply looked out over the crowd and said, Reed Carson never asked for recognition, but today we give it anyway, because some legacies fly longer than wings. Flyovers came next. Chinooks, Apaches, Blackhawks, not military order, just volunteers who had once trained over that very ground. They dipped low in honor, engines growling like distant thunder. At the end, Daniel, the same boy with the crayon letter years ago, now in uniform, stepped forward. He laid a single small stone on Reed's porch step. On it, 4 words etched carefully. Echo 9 still watches. The farm was placed in a perpetual trust, a living memorial. Cadets still train there, kids still visit, and a bench now sits on the edge of the west field, under a flag that reads, Don't forget who taught you to land. And in that space, as the sun rises each day, the wind still shifts across the grass, and somewhere, always faint but never gone, the low murmur of rotors seems to whisper through the trees. Reed Carson's final watch continues, not as resistance, but as reminder of dignity, of duty, of ground that never gave up. In a world obsessed with progress, we sometimes forget the power of stillness, of land held not for profit, but for purpose. Reed Carson never raised a sign. He never staged a protest. He simply stayed. He stayed rooted in principle. He stayed loyal to legacy. He stayed when the world tried to move on without him. And in doing so, he reminded us that dignity doesn't need permission. It needs presence. Echo 9 became more than a training ground. It became a mirror for everything we risk losing when we stop asking why some things matter more than money. So when they tried to bulldoze history, the world learned something unexpected. You can't evict honor, you can't outbid integrity, and you can't pave over a man who made the sky safer for everyone else. Because sometimes, to defend the future, you just have to hold your ground.